This is the second celebration of Bloomsday in Croatia that Igor has organized. And this year we decided to come to Pula because Joyce lived here for a few months, and he wrote some of the stories in Dublin. And so we spent yesterday in Zagreb and celebrated Joyce's Ulysses. And then today we're here in Pula and we're celebrating Ulysses, but also Dubliners, his collection of short stories. Because, you know, the cities were so important to James Joyce. But of course, this breaks and she loses it. She spends the rest of her life working to pay off that necklace. When she finally delivers it to the mistress, the woman says, "Oh, that whole thing? It was made of wax or glass, or that wasn't real." And the story ends there. So most of the short stories through time had a climax and then a sort of denouement. With Joyce, there's really no climax. He liked to end the story before the climax, because really, the interesting part of the story, oh yeah, I said climax, I know. An ending before climax.
He's probably thinking of Maria.
I need a drink. Like the real interesting part of Evelyn is to find out what happens when she gets to Argentina. Does he take advantage of her? Does she leave it there? Does she get to whatever? But Joyce decides to end it there. So he's really changing the entire structure of the short story. That's why Dubliners is so important as a form, because in these stories they end before something really big happens. And the way he explained it is, he liked the stories to end just as the main character was kind of going, just beginning to put them together. Like in the States, there's this famous commercial when I was growing up. Do you have the drink V8 here? It's like a tomato juice drink. No. Well, it's V8. It's a tomato juice drink with 8 vegetables. And there was a famous commercial years ago. One could look at themselves in my nicely polished looking glass. I can't help it. So he really wanted to show Dublin to Dublin, but also to the rest of the world. So there's an interesting looking glass structure to these various stories. Why don't you tell me what you know about Dubliners, and you can maybe take it from there. Anybody feel like mentioning a sentence?
I don't know a lot. I read Dubliners. I read Humanities. Refreshing course. Because I don't know. I didn't get because I didn't read the whole thing, so I didn't get the whole picture. I sort of got only the parts of it. So.
I mean, another interesting thing about Dubliners is there's a real snowball effect. So it's unfortunate when in a student anthology one story is printed, because you really need to read it from the beginning to the end, and then you begin to see the same thing over and over again. Not only does Evelyn make a bad or non-decision, the guy in the next story makes a bad or a paralytic decision. And by the time you get to the dead, you are so sick of seeing Dubliners at the end of these stories. If you see another crying character at the end of Dubliners, you almost want to shoot yourself. And how does the dead end? Gabriel's crying, right? Because his wife loves someone else. So, I mean, the cumulative effect of reading all 15 stories is really essential. I'm glad you read a few, or you read a few, or you only read 3 or whatever. But when you read all 15, it's such a different attitude that you have at the end, because you really want to smack these characters. And even though I argued in the beginning that they're heroic, I guess maybe I'm changing that. Yeah.
Okay, so there are a couple of Croatian translations of Dubliners. One of the biggest problems was, well, until the recent editions, was that they, for some reason, the editors of these translations actually decided to put them not in the chronological order, Joyce's order, but to put them in the alphabetical order. Nobody really understood why. Or, for instance, just some sort of...
most of the publishers?
Yes, yes. So the first few editions from the 1950s, I don't know, until into the late 80s, were actually published that way. And they have been, well, they have made such changes which are really paradoxical, because you cannot break not the cycle but that linearity, you know, from sisters to dead, because there is really a gradation to these stories. So.
And even doing something simple like changing the sisters and the dead, that's a story that opens a collection and a story that ends it. The sisters isn't really a story about sisters at all. It's a story about a dead guy. The dead isn't really about anybody dead, but it's about two sisters. So those titles are interchangeable, and when you start changing the order of these stories, you lose that importance. Any Catholic during Joyce's day who opened up this book and saw the first story, The Sisters, there's only one thing that would have come into their head, and that is, it's about nuns, right? The sisters. It's not about sisters, it's about nuns. And they'd find pretty quickly it's not about nuns at all. That's an important lesson to learn from the very first word, because none of these titles really direct you in the right direction. Sorry, okay? For example, Evelyn, or Evelyn, however you pronounce that, isn't really a story about her. You think it is. Joyce tricks you into thinking it's about her, and you follow her through the narrative. Ooh, she's in love with Frank, and ooh, her father beat her. Ooh, her father beats her. You know, ooh, she might get on the boat, etc. You're following the wrong person, because it's called Evelyn, and you assume she's the person that you want to be looking at. Frank's the guy that you want to be following. And so, by looking at what Evelyn's doing, you're not paying any attention to this huge scam that Frank has mechanized, okay? All of these stories are about scams. And that's why, on the one hand, I think it's about heroics, because under colonial oppression, economic subjugation, patriarchal Catholic Church, blah, 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 the only way you can survive is by getting someone else before they get you, right? I mean, Marx would say that's what the class system does. It gets the lower classes fighting amongst themselves, and they're not paying attention to the rich bastards on top. So, The Sisters is one example of a title that has you looking at the sisters when it's really Father Frank who you ought to be looking at, because if you look at him, it raises really what's going on with it. What's he doing with this kid, you know? The next story, on Encounter, that sounds really nice. Oh, let's have an encounter. Oh, I have an encounter this evening. It sounds fancy, right? Like when you drink tea with Pinky. There's nothing encountery about an encounter, right? The kids play hooky, they go to the park. This well-dressed man comes up and he starts masturbating over them. That's not an encounter. That's a nightmare. You know? So by thinking that
liked it.
by thinking that they're having an adventure, you're kind of excited for the kids, because we've all played hooky, right? And had pumpkins, other things. Okay, all right, stop. We've all played hooky, right? Oh, I'm the only one who's ever played hooky?